It's 5 o'clock in London, it's midday in New York, midnight in Hong Kong, 4 a.m. in Sydney now, and 8 a.m. in San Francisco, and 9:30 at night in Mumbai. Probably 9 a.m. in San Francisco, I think. But anyway, I'm just reading the script without thinking. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Patrick L. Young, the IPO-VID Livestream, Series 33, episode number 4. That's episode number 196 in the aggregate. Starts here. We have a recorded show today, ladies and gentlemen. It is our second review of the year from the perspective of Exchange Invest and IPO-VID. We've got a fabulous array of guests coming on later in the show who are going to be talking about some of the highlights of the year. And first of all, of course, we have our second half of the big stories of the year. If you missed part one, you can find it wherever you're looking at this show, Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. Go search for IPO-VID. So amongst the big stories of the year, well, we come to the world down under. Australia. Sadly, in Australia, the ASX group monopolist woes have gone from bad to worse. Just when we thought last year was the nadir, things got appreciably worse during the course of the year. News is that not only is the tech stack dysfunctional for the vital process of clearing and settlement, but actually the whole company appears tragically dysfunctional. It's not a simple failure. It's truly an omni-shambles, according to our observers in Sydney. Gubu, snafu, fast. That was the word we coined this year. The term failure as a service. Welcome to the world of ASX. What a tragedy. Speaking of failure as a service, there's the London Stock Exchange Group. They have Pisces, but some thought it might all be a little bit of a fishy tale. And beyond that, it was a year of realization that for many, but not for those who read Exchange Invest, obviously, because we noted the Refinitiv merger would not work for the better in London's markets right back when the deal was taking place. However, the great mass of the mainstream media and many others have suddenly become incredibly cynical about, well, they're absolutely right, what has been the fundamental failure of the London Stock Exchange Group to appreciably advance the London Stock Exchange. There were so many stories worrying about the stasis of the LSE. It's hard to know which to feature. The theme was the same: IPOs going overseas, management not really appearing coherently pro-market, and nothing is helped by the anti-enterprise Labour government on whose Financial Advisory Committee pre-election the LSEG CEO was sitting. One glimpse of hope from the LSEG is the LCH, London Clearing House, which expanded the RMB, that's a renminbi, of China's potential internationalization scope by signing an MOU with Hong Kong's OmniClear. Trading that RMB yield curve, predominantly in Hong Kong, is edging closer. In deals during the course of the year, there were a few key markers. Let's look at the highlights. Euronext bought Affex. Once again, Stefan Bujna swept in and made the running to acquire the Greek exchange, in this case, aided by a rather vision-bereft, just there to do a deal quasi-caretaker, Greek CEO Yanis Kontopoulos. Owning the Greek market is Andy Phillip to Euronext and places Stefan Bujna closer still to his golden opportunity to coalesce the similar shareholder groups of Euroclear and Euronext in a Euro group under the Euronext banner. In the end, Euronext bought 75% after reducing their bid to 50% plus one share, having originally sought total domination of 100%. But nonetheless, they found a bargain in Affex, whose profit soared just as it was subsumed following another lucky Bujna bid. Other deals down under: CSE, the Canadian Securities Exchange, as I alluded to in part one of this review of the year, acquired NSX Australia, the national stock exchange there, while the year 2025 is closing out with the re-parochialisation strategy of new CEO Craig Donoghue at SIBO. That leaves their Australian exchange in possible sale closed down limbo. There was one deal down under as Richard Carlton took the intelligent initiative of sweeping in on behalf of the Canadian Securities Exchange that he runs from Toronto and buying the undervalued, underloved National Stock Exchange of Australia, which caters predominantly to SMEs and, of course, modest mining stocks. Music to the ears of CSE in many other ways. A third fabulous deal of the year: SIX, the Swiss exchange group, bought Aquis back in Europe. Bjorn Sibbern's his vision, in fact, for SIX included the acquisition of Aquis for its exchanges and the matching engines, which will now power all the Swiss and Spanish markets under SIX's control, as well as Aquis's London exchange and platforms in London, Paris. Thus, Bjorn Sibbern's hyperactive re-engineering of the SIX franchise continues. Talk of a pan-European SME venue is just one fascinating potential initiative, and the deal to buy Bay Markets gives SIX a full-scale and a full suite for exchange-traded derivatives from execution to CCP, leaving presumably a gap to buy a CSD tech provider in due course. Watch this space. All that news will be in Exchange Invest at exchangeinvest.com for subscribers to the exchange of information, the water cooler of the Bourse business. And finally, in our introduction to the year 2025, Vale, some wondrous names who were part of our Bourse world and beyond, who left us during a tragic and traumatic year. Aladapidus succumbed to cancer on March 16th. The former Philippine Stock Exchange chair, Harry Liu, who oversaw the exchange during the Asian crisis, died at 77, while the widely popular former LSE post-trade head Kevin Milne also passed away. Valet to the founding chairman of the CFTC, William T. Bagley, who died at home in California, having served on the commission from 1975 to 1980 and was chairman from 1975 to 1978. Then we finish this opening segment with tributes to 4 incredible trailblazing women in no order of precedence, because each was their own powerhouse of feminine brilliance. We start with one of NYSE's finest in a golden generation of management acumen. She was the woman who traversed the world selling listings and encouraging people to join capital markets. Cassandra Sayre was a unique figure and a wonderful, fabulous, warm and passionate devotee of free markets. It was a joy to have her as a guest on the classic IPO and PhD double header edition in our past from August of last year. And truly a tragedy seeing her lost to an accident in the Bahamas just over the Thanksgiving weekend holiday. In South Africa, we lost Monica Singer. She was the visionary founder of Straight, the CSD, and powered by a passion for settlement. Monica had moved into blockchain advocacy in recent years and remained a very, very strong woman in the business of settlement across the world, who helped make South African Stock Exchange actually function as a settlement entity from what previously had been little short of a complete and utter disaster, with the addition of the Straight CSD, and also beyond, offering her great services as a professor and a lecturer to the forthcoming generation. Tragically, Monica succumbed to cancer during the course of Q4. One lady who started her career by actually masquerading as a man, Steve Shirley. Dame Stephanie Shirley started Freelance Programmers and grew that to a near $3 billion business back in the days when there weren't that many $3 billion businesses around. She endowed the City of London with the wonderful headquarters, the livery hall of the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists. She was truly a living legend, and the world of women and technology is much the less without her. I say farewell to my wife. Beata Young did not work directly in exchanges, but she worked around it. She founded OneIt, the Women on It organization, to help promulgate and promote women in IT, women entrepreneurs and women directors. She made a great impact on the lives of many people around the world, many women of all ages, founded in Malta during the latter years of the last decade. And Beata was a ceaseless, passionate advocate for entrepreneurship, for women in all roles of management and directorship. And without her, our world is a much smaller place. RIP to all those great women. But above all, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at what Beata would have said herself. And as she said with Toby the dog that helped launch this series originally, with Beata's encouragement when I first did IPO-VID. Ladies and gentlemen, pug it. Just get out there and do it, because life is short, life is a joy, and truly our world is much of a lesser place without Beata, without Cassandra, without Monica, and without Dame Stephanie Shirley. Thank you very much to everyone who supported Exchange Invest during what was a pivotal and often challenging 2025. I firmly believe 2026 will be a great year in memory of those amazing female talents that we lost during this year. Let's move on to our show today to review 2025. From the tragedy, let's try and look to some more upbeat moments, because it's time to address the second tranche of our guests from this year in our Year in Review Part 2, discussing their thoughts on where the capital market revolution goes next, 26 years on from the original book's publication, and indeed with a bevy of fascinating insights and a few short videos to enjoy on the way through. First of all, let's talk about Steve Zwick, a former futures broker. Steve Zwick has been a trader. He writes about the economics of sustainable development and the interplay between land use, climate change, subjects he developed a fascination for in a 30-year career that brought him from Chicago's trading pits and led to subsistence farms in rural parts of Kenya, Vietnam, and Brazil. He was our guest with his fabulous new book, and he was talking about digitizing carbon in the middle of July. IPO-VID number 182. Here's Steve Zwick. Let's hear from him.
I think right now, and especially in terms of carbon markets, it's going towards digitization. It's going to go very, very quickly. And then that's going to lead to integration of carbon into other, corporate supply chain activities and corporate valuation. I think we're on the brink of a new era in transparency of environmental impacts. People have heard that before, but I'm worried people have digitization fatigue. I know I did, because you get tired of hearing the same thing over and over again. But one thing I didn't mention that might be important, one reason it's taken so long to get these digitized methodologies is that it's like a chain, and it's only as good as the slowest chain. And if you have bottlenecks like we have had, you can digitize 90% of it. Nothing will matter if everything's got to stack up at that one point. And I think as those bottlenecks disappear, we'll see this accelerating.
Digitization fatigue, also carbon fatigue in many ways. One of the most exciting things I think that's happening in the world of carbon markets right now is the fact that we've reached the end of the catastrophism era, and we're actually looking at practical developments in order to make the world a better place, rather than paranoia about the evil of Swedish doom goblins et al. And their impact upon what goes on in the world. This is a great time for the voluntary carbon markets, for all the carbon markets across the world, and that trend towards digitization can only make for better markets and a better world. Joining us this year from the Washington, D.C. Beltway, he was talking all the way from Washington, D.C. to Argentina and the Milei miracle in Buenos Aires and beyond. It was a joy to chat to economist Dan Mitchell. Let's hear from Dan.
Unfortunately, I think the biggest thing to look at in capital markets is the danger of another European-style debt crisis. If, heaven forbid, there's any sort of global recession, I would be stunned if it didn't wind up producing a debt crisis. France, Italy, maybe even the United Kingdom. I mean, so many of these countries are in just very difficult shape because of their demographics and their structure of their governments, with just too much of the economy being diverted into political control. And that's what makes me very, very nervous in the long run. And for all I know, the long run might only be a year or two away. I hope we have a lot more time than that. But like I said, the moment there's some sort of hiccup in the global economy, I'm going to be very, very nervous about what's going to happen with some of these European welfare states that have refused to take seriously their fiscal situations.
That refusal to take your fiscal situation seriously, Europe, is something that's been an endless recurring theme in Exchange Invest for more than a decade now. Now it's become incredibly acute. And of course, the other thing that we saw was the failure of Capital Markets Union during the course of this year. A hodgepodge of verbiage being spouted by Brussels, which demonstrated that it doesn't understand markets, it doesn't understand the economy, and it certainly doesn't understand economic growth. Don't forget those magic numbers over the course of the last 15, 16 years. The European economy has grown in aggregate by 9%. Overall. The United States of America, 87%. And that's despite what was not necessarily the greatest series of governments through that period. Moving on to the United States of America, Melissa Dorman is a former social worker turned financial activist and author of Bank on Your Neighbor. It was a joy to chat with her in September on the 16th from actually the ICE headquarters of ICE Futures Europe. IPO-VID 184 was a great discussion about how in just 5 years, Mel's work focused on decentralizing wealth and empowering everyday people to buy property without banks has kept money circulating within communities and delivered to her a handy portfolio of property. Let's hear from Melissa where the capital market revolution goes next.
I think it goes back to our communities. I think in a lot of ways, we've grown so large in our populations, we've become very distanced from one another, especially in the Western world. And I think there's a big desire for community and there's a big desire for interdependency. And so I think the capital market revolution is going to be a return to community and helping one another and recognizing the significance of those direct partnerships. So I think it will become neighbor to neighbor.
From peer-to-peer to neighbor-to-neighbor, that was the message from Melissa Dorman. A fabulously upbeat show that. I encourage you all to go back and watch the entirety of IPO-VID number 184 as we all look to bank on our neighbours. Now, I said we would have a few short videos during the course of this show, and let's play the first reel, ladies and gentlemen. One thing that we carried through from part one, the excitement of population pyramids, and particularly those in Africa, where the population growth trends look so encouraging. Let's see how that came through in our short video.
Meanwhile, in Big World, fun fact talking about African-specific population trends, Nigeria is expected to grow from 238 million people today to 369 people. Zambia is going to add 700,000 citizens per annum, and the population of Mozambique will double from the current 34.6 million. For more in Big World, like or follow.
And that was 369 million, obviously, rather than just 369 people leaving. Good grief, that would end up leaving Nigeria even more sparsely populated than Namibia, which I think is the least populous nation per area in Africa. If my memory serves me correctly, it's certainly one of fascinating population pyramid statistics that will lead us to greater markets and more opportunities in the future for all manner of investors. Of course, one of the issues we have covered frequently during the course of this year has been carbon markets. Renat Heuberger, a Swiss climate activist, serial entrepreneur and impact investor, joined us for our show on the 23rd of September this year, IPO-VID number 185. He's launched and led several pioneering sustainability organizations, including My Climate, South Pole, and Terra Impact Ventures. And he was talking about the book that he's co-authored with, amongst others, Steve Zwick, who we heard from earlier on, which has the fabulous title, The Carbon Paradox. Let's hear from Renat.
I believe that the moment when we overcome capital markets is beyond the moment when we save the climate. In other words, if you want to really contribute to solving problems, we have to do it with the markets. And I'm very convinced that based on all the lessons we've learned over the past years, the next iteration of academics, the next iteration of financial industry players will have a much better tool set available, also using all the new AI-based tools to actually really make capital markets useful to solve our problems. The tools are all there, the lessons are all learned. I'm very confident that the next round, this time, is going to be different. This time, we will make things better than we did last round.
And there, ladies and gentlemen, we have the phrase, this time it will be different, somewhat contrary to what a lot of people say about markets so often, but there are fundamental grounds for reasons for progress in the world, which Renat Heuberger is so elegantly outlining here. Alongside Renat, we also met his third co-author of this fabulous book, The Carbon Paradox, Marco Hirsbrunner, a Swiss serial entrepreneur and impact investor, co-founded Terra Impact Ventures, where he leads operations and drives the growth of sustainability-focused startups. He also serves as co-CEO of Svarmi, an Icelandic company specializing in geospatial and nature data. And he joined us once again for that same show alongside Steve Zwick and Renat Heuberger, IPO-VID number 185 on the 23rd of September. Let's hear his view through the lens of the carbon paradox about where the capital market revolution is going next.
Post-singularity, our AI overlords will ensure that all external costs need to be internalized into the product. So you can't simply pollute without paying, or at least that's my hope.
With his tongue slightly planted in the cheek there, Marco Hirsbrunner nonetheless offered us, well, at least something that was not a dystopian view of the future of artificial intelligence, but an AI that might help coalesce with Gaia in order to make a better planet. And indeed, that brings us to the third conclusion and his second appearance this evening for my dear friend Steve Zwick, former futures broker trader, the man who writes about the economics of sustainable development and the interplay between land use and climate change. So from the Chicago pits to subsistence farms all over the world and many other carbon projects beside, here is Steve Zwick talking about the capital market revolution and where it goes next from the perspective of the carbon paradox. Let's hear from Steve.
Yeah, I think in this particular context, it will go to more homegrown solutions in developing countries. One thing we've had in carbon finance up till now is that most of the ideas have come from the West and been implemented in developing countries. But what really struck me when I was in Kenya was the amount of homegrown talent, the people who are emerging in these countries to implement projects on their own, whether they're agroforestry, whether it's clean cooking, whether it's clean water. That is where this is moving to, where the solutions will not only be the solutions that are currently being developed in forest nations will now be developed by forest nations. And I think that is going to be the next big revolution within this space.
A very, very interesting concept that the solutions that are currently being developed in forest nations will now be developed by the forest nations. That certainly is going to be a huge revolution if it takes place, and I certainly wish it every success in happening. From the carbon paradox, we go to more pure play technology. Daniel Davis, he leads the sales and marketing efforts at Connemara Technologies. In fact, he's just been promoted during the course of time when we started writing the show notes for this show to Chief Revenue Officer of Connemara Technologies, the people behind the EP3 matching engine, amongst other things. He joined one of our panel sessions this year with the fabulous Berg and the amazing Hamish Adourian. We're going to be hearing from in a moment. 30th of September, we were talking about a panel with markets and IT, and let's hear from Dan Davis.
It was fascinating to see that SEC, CFTC, Love Fest, as we called it yesterday, and the changing of the guard. I mean, you see Terry Duffy talking about being a Kalshi user. You see Shane Copeland, sitting next to Jeff Sprecher. It's really interesting just to see the dichotomy of participants at the round table, but also just the ideas and also how receptive to maybe old guard is, as they are called by the Polymarket founder, to these maybe newer ideas. So excited for, I guess, a bit of turnover or innovation here in the U.S. when it comes to capital markets and trading new products for retail users.
And indeed, as we were talking at throughout the course of the last year, and indeed have been discussing for some 30 years in the world of PLY, prediction markets, finally, they seem to be the next and future thing that is arriving in the world at the moment. Very, very exciting times, and I, as one of the people who originally scoped prediction markets out in the mid-1990s, I'm delighted to see their success taking place. Somebody who was scoping markets long before Dan Davis was active, long before I was active, is Berg, our commodities doyen. Anne is a leading expert in commodities, commodity futures and food security issues, former director of the Chicago Board of Trade, formerly with the UNFAO, amongst a multitude of other organizations where she's helped develop and organize markets throughout the world in all form of commodities. She joined that same panel on the 30th of September, IPO-VID number 186, to discuss markets and IT. And let's hear from Anne.
I think that there'll be just much more securitization of old-fashioned products, such as futures. Maybe there isn't the appetite for slicing up a ton of wheat or a bar of gold or something. I'm sure there's a product out there that everyone's going to want to buy. I think I've mentioned to you, Patrick, that a lot of this is being driven, I think, by institutions that find a new way of making money. I mean, margins have been cut drastically in capital markets, so this could be a product where you've got the retail sector funding projects such as revenue streams from royalties that you would need to do your due diligence on to really be fully informed. So I think it's moving further. The democratization is fine, but it sounds like the markets are moving further towards capturing more retail growth. That's a sword that cuts both ways.
Markets capturing more retail growth, a sword that cuts both ways. Certainly something's a very interesting point there made by Berg. But yes, the ongoing securitization trend, a lot of people are seeing that as DLT tokenization. But remember back to the part one show, the last video we had from Dr. Robert Barnes. It's more about the securitization long term than necessarily whether or not it uses a blockchain, I think, is going to be the key as to what goes on in the future. Anyway, it was a joy to welcome Anne onto several of our panels this year. We're going to have more panels coming up in 2026 with some of our doyens of different markets around the world joining us as guests, and of course our regular panelists, amongst them Mark Bettis and Berg, as features of those shows. Now that leads us very elegantly to our second short video of the day. As you know, we produce a multitude of different outputs here at Exchange Invest, and through the IPO-VID channel we have the longer live streams such as this. And I have to say a huge word of thanks to all the people who subscribe to our daily newsletter. Exchange Invest. ExchangeInvest.com if you want to sign up and subscribe and be, well, part of an exclusive club, understanding better than anybody else possibly can what's going on. We call it the exchange of information. It's the water cooler of the bourse business. And thanks to those subscribers and our sponsors, amongst them BMLL, NASDAQ, EP3 by Connemara and Sinara, we have the opportunity to bring to you these videos, both short and long form. And here is a short form video that we ran during the course of this year. And actually, well, we tend not to be the news story most of the year round, but as we reached 12, we thought it was time to talk a little bit about ourselves.
In 1940, 60% of today's jobs didn't exist. In 1970, 90% of today's markets didn't exist. Exchange Invest embodies the capital market revolution. We're the only daily pithy analysis devoted exclusively to the business of bourses. On our 12th birthday, our track record speaks for itself. Exchange Invest is the exchange of information. Exchange Invest champions markets, and yet, while we've enjoyed a half-century of unprecedented market growth, we're barely in the early stages of bringing more liquidity, accessibility, and transparency to drive prosperity around the world. 90% of today's markets may be barely 50 years old, but we still have 90% more markets to launch. What market are you going to build in the age of the exchange? On behalf of the team, thank you to all our loyal subscribers and sponsors for their support over the years in helping us deliver unparalleled insights for the markets of today, looking to the exciting world of the markets of tomorrow. This is the age of the exchange. Happy birthday, Exchange Invest.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very, very much, in particular to AJ Arcos, who's done such an incredible job with our videos during the course of the year. Really, really fabulous work. Whether we were at the Mdina Grand Prix or we were discussing the future of markets and how many more markets there were to build, it has been a joy having AJ produce such stunning video content throughout the course of 2025. Thank you very, very much, AJ. That leads us elegantly towards our books this week, and it gives us an opportunity to highlight a series of books of the year. We had a first tranche during the course of our first episode. Amongst them, I think you'd have to remember, was, of course, Confessions of a Carbon Hunter, the quasi-memoir of Dr. Richard Sandor, the OG of the carbon markets themselves. That makes a very, very elegant addition to your bookshelf alongside the Carbon Paradox. What else could we talk about? Of course, the book that brought together by Messrs. Heuberger, Hirsbrunner, and indeed also Steve Zwick has produced an elegant fable for the times in and around the carbon markets. Mel Dorman, she was our guest, as I was mentioning, on IPO-VID number 184, which came live from the headquarters of Intercontinental Exchange in Europe. Thank you very much to them for providing that lovely venue. Bank on Your Neighbor is a very elegant book that's well worth recording and looking at as an opportunity for many people, particularly in the United States, to build a property portfolio and maintain a neighbor-to-neighbor, peer-to-peer form of transactions. Ponzi schemes. They're always something that are very popular to talk about. The greatest Ponzi scheme in this case, we were talking on the same show as our guest came from the Washington Beltway in order to talk about all of the opportunities between DC to Argentina. Well worth reading this book, a fantastic tome on the greatest Ponzi scheme of all, which is, well, I suppose in some ways I could be giving away the plot line here, so I'll just leave it to you. Go pick up that fabulous tome by our former guest Daniel Mitchell and his co-author Les Rubin. Multi-currency mercantilism. We've heard from the fabulous Kathleen Tyson in the first edition of this year-end review last week. Well worth looking at that. Her argument: the world is shifting from 80 years of dollar dominance and US hegemony to a pluralist multi-currency mercantilism. The new international monetary order is the order of the day for multi-currency mercantilism by Kathleen Tyson. Well worth having a read at, even though it might cause you a little bit of indigestion during the course of whatever it is you're eating over the festive season. Sir Paul Collier, he was also featured in our first show of highlights of this year. Absolutely phenomenal. A new economics for neglected places is left behind. thoroughly must-read tome, as are all of these selections of our book of the year, and indeed The Corporation in the 21st Century by Sir John Kay, another guest from our last show where Paul Collier was on IPO-VID number 171, Sir John Kay was on IPO-VID 174, and both of these gentlemen thoroughly deserve to have been knighted by the monarch of the United Kingdom for their incredible contribution to business, economics, and development the world over. Beyond 21st Century Corporations, absolutely also a must-read in our bookshelf for this year, ladies and gentlemen. Returning to the topic of today, people discussing where the capital market revolution will go next. I'm back at panel show on the 30th of September, IPO-VID number 186, discussing markets and IT with Hamish Adourian, the head of sales and marketing at the London software house Sonara. Let's hear from Hamish.
About everything we've been talking about over the past hour, really. In a sense, us as technologists, everything that we're trying to do is, make things faster, break down the boundaries, improve the flows, remove the inefficiencies, make it all super fast, immediate settlement, everything else that we're talking about. In a sense, actually, what an exchange is supposed to be is this ordered, safe, unique, highly rule-driven, regulated marketplace with very clear boundaries, and rules essentially is what sums them up. Really about how to reconcile the two. So where the revolution goes next essentially is where those technological changes will lead it. Yes, more retail participation. That's probably an entire debate given the transatlantic audience that we have, the panelists that we have today, certainly more in the States than it is on this side of the pond. So that will be interesting itself to see how that develops, increased retail participation. I agree absolutely with Anne on increased securitization, maybe not necessarily tokenization, but again, the question as ever is how can exchanges do that in a way that actually brings some of that trading, some of the OTC trading that's happening out there onto a regulated venue. Maybe we can provide some technology to help with that. Who knows?
What interesting insights from Hamish Adourian. Sonara, one of the leading vendors in the field, particularly working very, very strongly with the London Metals Exchange and a large amount of the world's commodities environment, but also in a much, much broader sense, they are vendors to the world with all manner of technology. Very interesting to hear, again, that nuancing. Maybe it's not all about tokenization on the blockchain, but it's certainly about the securitization, managing to enable fractional ownership to different assets. And I think that becomes a very, very key theory and concept as we go forward during the course of the next year. It's amazing we've managed to have, good grief, I think at least 10, if not 15 minutes so far in the 2025 year in review part 2 here from IPO-VID without mentioning artificial intelligence. One of the things that's going to be very interesting here is not just artificial intelligence, but where it interacts with quantum finance. And quantum finance itself, by the way, has a big impact on that distributed ledger technology going down the road, and not necessarily a positive one either if you're reading the forward-looking papers. Hayden Van Der Post, he has a 15-year background in finance. He's a former child chess prodigy, and he sought to lift the hood on the upcoming world of quantum computing and thus quantum finance by talking about, amongst other things, his book, Quantum Finance. Let's hear from Hayden.
In the meantime, I believe that AI is going to be the current focus application. There is still a lot of work, use case to be done there. And that's where the next 5 years really are. And after that, we're moving towards quantum computing mixed with AI. But ultimately, the macro environment for the global economy, there is a lot of headwinds. So in terms of investing scope and scape, there's just a lot of challenges for a lot of different countries right now that I don't know if AI really is going to be the focus for 5 years. Yeah, I would say.
Fascinating insights there from Hayden Van Der Post. It was a real pleasure to hear his insights on what was going on. And here we have, yes, some fascinating consideration of the nuancing of use cases in what pretty much all our guests have been saying is a world of opportunity driven by AI. But don't forget, of course, we had that great thought from Dominic Roche, which was that maybe AI and its related processes are going to actually open up little opportunities, tiny blemishes in the fabric of space-time continuum of markets, as it were, that's going to provide a human opportunity to profit, at least in the interim term. Now, someone who found a way to profit in the fabric of humanity in the interim term was Paul Podolsky. He was our guest discussing The Uncomfortable Truth About Money, which we highlighted as one of our books of the year in the first episode of this series review. Kate Capital founder Paul Podolsky began as an author. In fact, he began as a journalist. It was while he was working as a journalist in Moscow, he suddenly came to the conclusion that perhaps to look after his family better, he should look more into this world of investment. And ultimately, he became a very, very significant investor in his own right, the founder of Kate Capital. He was for many years a strategist and investor for Bridgewater Associates. He's the author of 3 books, and he came on our show to discuss the fabulous tome, The Uncomfortable Truth About Money. Let's hear from Paul.
I think that what we're going to see is a bifurcation between traditional assets and more non-traditional assets. So the things that are going on with Bitcoin that I know capture many of your listeners is, for me, it's also like new technology that particularly works well in emerging markets. So there's been developed markets where all the capital has been, and then there's been these emerging markets. We've talked about how these booms and busts. I think the most practical application of new digital assets is providing monetary policy for the vast majority of the world that is exposed to terrible monetary policy. So I'm thinking about big chunks of Latin America, big chunks of Africa, certain parts of Asia. And so that is a huge change in the technology of banking. And I think it puts huge strain on the existing legacy systems to this new system that is developed. And then simultaneously, there's clearly a huge east-west tension at who is going to control capital markets, because the epicenter of the U.S. power is U.S. capital markets. And you're seeing that whole system begin to shake now with the autonomy of the Fed and this new technology that allows emerging markets to sidestep their own central banks.
A degree of central bank disintermediation, possibly a degree of anarchy, certainly a very, very interesting reverberation in the capital markets continuum, if not the overall trade continuum as well to boot. And perhaps this ties in with the multicultural mercantilism thesis of Kathleen Tyson as well. Certainly well worth visiting Paul's book and also comparing that with Kathleen Tyson's book. A gripping show that was altogether. It was a joy to hear about The Uncomfortable Truth About Money in IPO-VID number 188. And Paul was mentioning emerging markets such as South America. It was a joy to manage to go to the heart of Central America and chat with José Andres Mayora, the author of Wall Street's Blind Spots, another of books of the year, which we mentioned in the first of the two-parter that is this two-part series of end-of-year reviews. He's the co-founder of the DeVita Value Growth Fund, a long-term public equities fund grounded in value investing principles. He serves as senior portfolio manager, overseeing global equity investments and fund operations. Talking about Wall Street's blind spots on the 21st of October this year in IPO-VID 189. Well, let's hear from José.
I think you're actually going to like this one because, it's very contemporary in my book. I think we're going to move to a money without borders. So if you think of like the exchanges in the foreign exchange markets, not like they're going to disappear, they're going to be there, but their importance is going to be diminished by things, in particular, the company called Wise, which is a case study I talk about in the last chapter of the book, how they managed to create their own infrastructure to move money across borders and across currency in a seamless way without having an exchange in between. And obviously, I won't go into the details of how that happened, but I think that's the revolution that a lot of people are asleep about yet, but in the next 5, 10, and 15 years is going to become increasingly evident.
It was fabulous to meet José Andres Mayora and talk to him about his very, very interesting value investing approach, something that he manages to do from the middle of from Guatemala in Central America. And it was a joy to manage to hear about how he can find blind spots in what even the mainstream Wall Street analysts thousands of miles away can't spot in their own stocks. food for thought for all of us, and perhaps also, of course, tying in with Dominic Roche's theory that even in a world of AI, there still exist little opportunities for us to manage to find some degree of alpha from understanding investments better than either the bots or the analysts themselves. Let's move to our third reel, ladies and gentlemen. And in a way, this is a wonderfully happy but also melancholy reel. It is something that we enjoyed celebrating throughout the course of this year. It took place on July the 5th last year, and it was an opportunity for us to celebrate Exchange Invest and to celebrate, in fact, the core thesis of what we're discussing today, the capital market revolution, to mark the 25th anniversary of that on July the 5th last year. We had the opportunity to ring the New York Stock Exchange closing bell. I have to say it was absolutely an honor, and it continues to give me a thrill to this day. And at the same time, as you watch this, enjoy the beautiful blonde woman waving her scarf in absolute glee. As we say, a wonderful valet, and think about those people, particularly Cassandra Sayer and indeed my wife Beata, who are no longer with us this year. A melancholy moment in what was an outstanding point of happiness as we rang the closing bell. What a great day. Thanks to all my friends and colleagues, and particularly that amazing coterie of fearless girls that came to Wall Street and rang the New York Stock Exchange closing bell under the watchful eye of the amazing NYSE president, Lynn Martin, who's had another incredible year running that great institution. We faced a lot of fears this year, ladies and gentlemen, and one of those fears that we always have to face is our financial fears. Yesterday, or at least on last week's show, Alan Dickinson was giving us a great insight into how he feels that financial education needs to be something that we power forward in throughout the world, and I thoroughly echo his sentiments. Jake Cousineau, he joined us to discuss his book, Face Your Financial Fears, on IPO-VID. Just over a month ago, on the 11th of November, on IPO-VID number 191. Let's hear from Jake.
We backed ourselves into a corner here of, over the past, I'd say 10 years, like as an example, I think like getting therapy, right? Getting therapy has become much more common. It's much more socially acceptable. For a long time, it was sort of stigmatized unjustly. It's like, ooh, there's something wrong with you. You're going to go see a therapist. And obviously, that's completely false. Like today we embrace it like, no, you should go see a therapist, talk about these things. I think we are close. I think we have to be right around the corner from, we have to address this money issue. We have to stop feeling bad about it, right? And again, because the economy is not the strongest worldwide, people are really, struggling to get by. I think we're going to sort of face this reckoning the hard way, unfortunately. But I do think that the positive that will come out of it is people are going to have to address their money issues, right? I can't ignore it anymore. I need to understand this stuff. And so ambitiously, romantically, hopefully, I think that's where we're headed.
Ambitiously, romantically, hopefully, let's face our financial fears together, ladies and gentlemen. It was a joy to chat to the inspiring Jake Cousineau from California during the course of IPO-VID 191 in the middle of November. And indeed, from one young generation inspiration to a man who is an inspiration and has been an inspiration for many years. He is the OG of financial futures. He's the creator of the carbon and environmental market space. He's truly had greater impact probably on financial markets than pretty much anybody else alive, certainly anybody else alive who hasn't held elected office. It was my joy to chat to Professor Dr. Richard Sandor in Chicago at the Union League Club on the AFM Tech Day conference sponsored by Connemara EP3, and it was fabulous to hear The Confessions of a Carbon Hunter. It's a great book. Go get it, ladies and gentlemen, up front in IPO-VID 192, and it seemed only appropriate as we were in Chicago that I should endeavor to don some sort of reasonable headwear for the chilly winter and also to be in postural congruence with this great man, the Chevalier de la Légion d'Honneur, Professor Dr. Richard Sandor. Let's hear from him.
I'm a restless soul. I'm 800 years old. I can't wait for the next project. I can't wait for the next idea. I teach at the University of Chicago. I ask my students to invent a market that's new and what's challenging. And these brilliant young men and women from Booth and a law school and Harris come up with markets for space junk, which will be required in 2030, given Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. What are we going to do in traffic for space junk? And then they come up with other markets to create a market for judgeships, where you can give half to the Democrats, half to the Republicans, and create a market for people swapping 3 associate judges and 1 appellate court for a Supreme Court, and put a market-based solution to drive politics to the center. Cap and trade for jail space, to have people are incarcerated inappropriately and for lower base crimes, and to put cost bases and benefit basis and have markets reveal what jail capacity is. So the ideas are endless. You know, I think about yesterday is cute, but but it's not exciting when there are so many busy things to do.
The OG, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Dr. Richard Sandor. It was genuinely an honor to be allowed by the Association of Futures Markets to chat with him in a fireside chat at the Union League Club during the IFM Tech Day. What an incredible man. I think we could have carried on for the entire day. I somehow had images at one stage that we could have been still chatting in the evening and a waiter could have produced a couple of Negronis and a cigar if it wasn't a smoke-free environment. And we would have carried on the chat regardless. It was a joy and an honor. Do not miss that show. Another of our unmissable episodes of IPO-VID during the course of the year. And that brings us to our final female guest of 2025, Véronique Peiffer, PhD, an entrepreneur and life sciences professional who co-founded and led PalmCo, a company focused on the development of therapeutic bioelectronics, a pivotal experience that served as the primary inspiration for the topic of our discussion and her excellent book. It was one of the books of the year that we highlighted yesterday, The Scrappy Entrepreneur. Véronique is a product director at Genentech Inc. and teaches the next generation of health tech entrepreneurs as an associate director of the Stanford Musalem Center for Biodesign. On that show, 25th November 2025, IPO-VID 193, The Scrappy Entrepreneur. Let's hear from Véronique.
I will have to answer this from the outside in, right? I'm not a financial capital market expert, so I will really answer this from the outside in. And where my mind is going with this question relates to AI. Looking from the outside in, I think there's a lot of people out there not currently in the stock markets, and now they have, like everyone has a Goldman Sachs team, like research team, at their fingertips. So I do think it kind of changes the playing field for who is interested and maybe think that they have the right knowledge to start making investments. But it's not about leveling the playing field. It's probably about leveling up the playing field. Like everyone has their information at their fingertips so much easier than we used to. So I think it does, probably in line with what you said in your original book, it's just about acceleration as a result, because everyone has that information at their fingertips right away. I think there is also something interesting around misinformation, because yes, everyone has their information at their fingertips. We're dealing with very few AI models that we're all relying on. So I'm really curious about what that's going to bring with regard to misinformation, and will there sometimes be unexpected changes in stocks just because of misinformation being spread by a couple of those AI models. So really curious to see what that will bring.
So the fascinating conclusions of Véronique Peiffer as she was looking at from the regulatory or highly regulated standpoint and lens of being in biotech startups and medtech startups compared to financial markets. It was a very, very interesting contrast from one entrepreneur to another, and an absolute joy to manage to hear her discussing the future of the capital market revolution as a non-capital markets practitioner. Do check out The Scrappy Entrepreneur. Great book, well worth a read. I thoroughly recommend it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to our final guest of the year, Mehmet Memo Belgin. He's originally from Turkey. He's a PhD, a supercomputing expert with a background in naval architecture and engineering. He was discussing his remarkable odyssey in trading alongside a day job helping AI research. Back in the medtech field once again, helping fight cancer. The Human Factor, a trading journey, aired just a couple of weeks ago on December the 2nd, and it was a joy to have Mehmet as our guest on IPO-VID number 194. Let's hear from Memo.
Assuming that AI is not the future, I would say AI, but I think it's today. It is going to quantum. And if your listeners have not listened to your previous episode, was it the previous one or one of the recent ones with Hayden Van Der Post? Fascinating session. And it was great to get his insights about quantum future in general and also what it will change for the finance. There are a couple of stuff there that was a little alarming for me, like trading is not going to be the same. Quantum is going to change everything. He makes a lot of sense. Like I know Monte Carlo simulations from any other stuff, and you have to do them one by one or in parallel, but quantum just all of a sudden do this. But I think it will change the trading tremendously for institutions. But again, I decided not to be a shark. I'm a parasite now. And I'll continue to look for ways on jumping on whatever is moving for whatever reason. So I'm not going to compete with institutions with quantum powers in their hands. But I think there will be a place for individual traders like me in that future as well.
A world of opportunity for individual traders, no matter whether you're a PhD in supercomputing or you are an ordinary mortal. That's one of the messages I think has come throughout the course of this year in IPO-VID, and it's been a joy to have such an incredible roster of guests, concluding there with Memo Belgin. Thank you very, very much to all those who were part of this show: Steve Zwick, Dan Mitchell, Melissa Dorman, Renat Heuberger, Marco Hirsbrunner, Daniel Davis, Berg, Hamish Adourian, Hayden Van Der Post, Paul Podolsky, Jose Andres Mayora, Jay Cousineau, Dr. L Sandor, Véronique Peiffer, and indeed, as I mentioned just right now, Memo Belgin. Also, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget you can catch out part one of this series, which was on last week with Joe Sakela, Sally Bridgeland, Alan Dickinson, Susan Giddle, Ira Harris, Kathleen Tyson, Sir Paul Collier, Max Cunningham, Sir John Kay, Dominic Roche, Matthew Ringenberg, Megan Johnson, Alessandro Hattami, Mark Bettis, Michael Habte, Peter Randall, and Dr. Robert Barnes. Those were the people bringing together today's show. I want to say that we look forward to seeing you next year, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to return after our festive seasonal break, January the 13th. We've got a fantastic show. We're talking about BMLL. They're the people who've reshaped market data over the course of the last 5 years, how we use it, how we conserve it, how we actually curate it. Paul Humphrey, their CEO, is going to be talking about BML, a new chapter in IPO-VID number 197. 7. And let me just say thank you very much to everybody who raised questions during the course of this year's season. Let me also say a huge word of thanks to our production crew today, Herminia, Desiree and AJ, and also to all those team members who've been involved in production during the course of the year. So in addition to Herminia, Desiree and AJ, my profound thanks to Racy, Jamil, Marianne, Natalie, Kim, Janella, Rushlin, and of course, the late, great Bata Young, who played a role in so many of these shows all the way through until her unfortunate demise during the course of the summer. And ladies and gentlemen, therefore, if there's a message to take away for today, it's one of I wish you all a wonderful, happy, festive season. I say thank you to everybody who's interacted with us this year. I say particular heartfelt thanks to our sponsors, to BMLL, to Sinara, to NASDAQ, to EP3 by Connemara. Thank you all so much for supporting us. To every one of our subscribers who supports us during the course of this year, we couldn't do Exchange Invest or the IPO vids or the short videos without you. But it remains for me to just offer, well, to leave you with it, ladies and gentlemen, life is short. And let me say 2 words to sum up this year. If you want a marketplace built in 2026, get in touch with us. But the message of today, ladies and gentlemen, is we wish you all the best for the festive season. I thank the team for all of their incredibly hard work during the course of this year. But the truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, life is short, so pug it.